Hey darlings. So this is what the evening meeting of the board of directors looks like now. Lera with a smile met at the doors of the office a man who was. Lera asked coldly, leaning over the doorstep and folding her hands on her chest. Inside her, everything was clattering, burning, and not yearning. This man, whom she spent years of her life on, having forgotten about her own dreams and ambitions, was now standing in front of her with half-down pants and could not say a word. Lyric, without any comments, she interrupted him. Apparently, the meeting of the directors went successfully. Lur, stop it. I'll explain everything. He finally fastened the belt and moved to it. Stand where you are. The girl screamed sharply. The traitor was suddenly frozen in place. What the? His eyebrows came together on the carrier. Just not fitting this scene. I just lacked hysteria. But the natural restraint took over. I'm waiting for you at home. She turned around on her heels and, with her head high up, left the office. Finally appeared. Are you going to cook dinner at all? Fyodor's mother-in-law, Lera Borisovna, met the kindness in the hall. While Igor is patrolling, you are going around your plebeian friends. Yes, Igor really made some money. Lera looked at the skinny year-old woman in a silk peignoir. She was just burning at work. What? The tattooed eyebrows of her in-laws were indignant and crawled up. Tell your son when he comes home that I'm waiting for him upstairs, and someone else will take care of the dinner today. And Lera, gently nodding, headed to the stairs, which has never allowed such freedoms to itself to this day. It's been 3 years since Aglaya, under the pretext of a hypertonic crisis, moved to her son's house, and she has never been talked to in such a tone. What a fly she bit. This is a useless girl, the daughter of a German-language school teacher. She never liked it. And as soon as Igor got the idea to marry her, but they met at the institute, fell in love, and then they parted ways, looking for a couple from their circle. How ugly she dreamed of marrying Igor to the daughter of her late girlfriend, the heir of a jewelry business. Instead, the son got married to this poor, and even the designer's red diploma didn't make her more attractive. Lera fell on her bed and closed her eyes. The pain and the grief flooded her. Tears rolled out of her eyes. She was almost as painful as her mother died. She burned so quickly that the girl didn't have time to be with her, to say goodbye. It's been 2 years since that terrible day when, holding the only daughter in her hand, this heroic woman, she left the world of the Bryn. Because her father, Lera, didn't know. Her mother said that he died before she was born. There are no more people who are her relatives in the world. Olga Sergeyevna left her alone for her miserable teacher's salary. While Lera was studying at school and in the first year of the institute, before finishing her primary work, she was working as a trainee and washed the floors in a local supermarket. Sometimes the daughter did not see her for days, and she came home exhausted and tired, but never complained about life. She did not have a man, although many applicants tried to take a vacancy next to her. This woman was smart, beautiful, and lonely, the loyalty she kept for her whole life. Sometimes, when she was sad for her mother, the girl would dial her home phone number and listen to long, dull whispers. And now she's years old. No children, no work, and now she has no husband. Lera knew that she would never forgive this betrayal. Their marriage has long been breaking apart. They got married out of mutual love right after university, and 3 months later Igor's father died, and her husband inherited a profitable business in the field of construction and landscape design. He then clearly made her understand that she had to leave work, which Lera was still working on in the 3rd year, and to do housework, homemaking, and not think about any career. At that moment, she thought it was fair, and she willingly plunged into family troubles, hoping that children would appear soon. But they did not appear. All necessary tests and procedures were passed. They even began to consider the ECO option. But everything changed in a moment. In their house, Aglaya Borisovna appeared. and Lera stopped feeling like the owner of her own life. Yes, she was still repairing, planting flowers in the garden and preparing crazy meals and dinners, serving the table like in a Michelin restaurant. But there was no longer a sense of reliability and security. Lera got up from the bed and, wiping away the tears flowing with the waterfall, looked at the clock on the bedside table. The arrows showed 9 in the evening. To relax a little, she went to the shower. The girl barely threw her clothes away and turned on the water. The front door cracked at the bottom. Damn it, we need to hurry, she thought, and just in case, she locked the door. While Lera was standing under the hot streams, her thoughts slowly came to order. After wiping dry with a wet towel and putting on a robe, she came out of the shower. The bedroom was still empty. Lera came up to the mirror, where she saw a structured, square-eyed shanty with her homeland above her lips. Short, cut, wavy hair, picturesque, with a cheeky face. Opening the wardrobe, she took her jeans and t-shirt, and wearing them, came out of the room. There was no one in the hall, in the living room, in the kitchen. So no one came. This ugly woman went somewhere, looking at her. Probably on the broom, Lera thought and smiled bitterly. In the living room, she came up to the old buffet, where her pride was adorned with a magnificent service from the thinnest mason porcelain. She bought it during the wedding trip, in the German town of Worms. Igor was then confused why you can't buy such a thing in Russia instead of carrying it across half of Europe. But beautiful dishes, especially vintage, were Lerena's passion. Now she will have to leave all this, because Igor will surely not allow her to take anything. Not because he needs it, just because of his nature. Holly's steps were scattered, and in the next second she heard her husband's voice. "Larek, are you here?" How she wanted to launch something into him. "I'm here," she replied, turning to him. "I want to explain everything. Really? Come here, please." He pointed to her a real chair next to her. Lera silently walked by and sat down at the designated place. She wanted to look him in the eye, ask why, but she silently sat down on the newspaper lying on the journal table, trying to raise her gaze at him. She just didn't have it. "So you will be silent." Suddenly, the irritation in his voice was heard. "Seriously? You won't ask anything? Or you don't care?" She finally found the strength to look at him. There was a completely alien man sitting in front of her. "What to ask?" She smiled. "When did it start?" "I guess, because your evening meetings and business trips started exactly 3 months ago. Although maybe earlier. I know her name too. It seems that Lena, that she is, I know again." "Well, do you know the reason?" Igor turned around and put one hand on the back of the sofa, showing everyone that he was not embarrassed at all. "I was lost in my guess." The voice was treacherously trembling, but she managed to cope with herself. "Yes, because you have become so boring that I want to get bored. You are always in the kitchen, or you wear a pantyhose, for your stupid porcelain junk. God damn it. You have nothing to talk about except roses, gibisks, and tuyaks. And from under your arm, you have a just-picked girl tank with a curious nose and sharp tongue. Girl tank. You won't like the twigs," Lyria thought. She listened, and anger was boiling in her soul. The girl could not say a word of offense. Although it would be worth reminding this person that she sacrificed her successful career, dreaming of opening her business someday for the sake of their marriage. That for 3 years now she has been tolerating his stubborn and selfish mother in the house, who in every way tries to humiliate her. "Have you finished?" Lera asked exactly. Only tightly squeezed lips and whitened knuckles of the fingers proved that she was very tense. "No." He kept silent for a second. "Lena is pregnant. 5 weeks, to be more precise. I think Mom will be happy that she will finally have a grandson. Or granddaughter." He spoke in such a normal tone, as if they were discussing the menu called lunch. It was a breath of fresh air. Lera closed her eyes and tears flowed down her cheeks. You're such a scum, Sukhov. How could I live with you for so many years and not notice it? How could I? His words literally exhausted the poison. My dear, 2 years of relationship and 8 years of marriage made you a woman from the higher society. A rich woman. You know very well how much you're. In addition, you escaped from the poverty that you and your mom dragged with your one foot with the neighbor's alcohol behind the wall. After this phrase, Lera could not stand it and, falling forward, stuck a bell on his cheek. Oh, you're a bitch. The response was immediate, and Lera fell into a black abyss. In the morning, she called the only close person, which remained with her after Mom's death and Igor's betrayal. Vitolya, hello? Lera tried her best to keep her voice smooth and unobtrusive, but he still trembled. Can we meet today? Right away. What happened? The nervous voice of the friend made her smile. It happened, Vit, and I really need to talk to you. Of course. I'm already getting dressed. Dark glasses. Vitka surprisingly raised her eyebrows when in a couple of hours they met in her favorite cafe under the maple trees. This is something new, given that it's raining outside. Lera sat opposite her and silently took off her glasses, and masked with 5 layers of tonal cream. Mother of mine, what is this? Lurka, where are you from? From there. The girl replied dryly. Life is changing, Vitya. People are changing. Well, or maybe they are opening up. Is Igor really? Lurka took a deep breath and told Vitya yesterday's story. She sat down and looked at her friend closely. What are you going to do? Will you forgive him? If you do, I'll kill you myself. Lera looked away and looked outside, where the gloomy October rain had started. I'll leave. How to live with a man who betrayed you, who dared to raise his hand. But you will take your share of the property from him. Vitya threw another cube of sugar into her latte. I'm even stressed about all this. I don't think I'll be able to do anything. Yesterday, when I felt his tickles, she flinched. My beautiful husband told me that I would leave home with what I came with. That is, as you understand, without anything. However, he allowed me to take clothes and some decorations that he gave. The car naturally remains the future wife and mother of his child. That's exactly what I said. Well, you bastard. So, that's it. Don't worry. We'll think of something with the work. Most importantly, it's worth leaving this bastard. By the way, you can move in with me. Lera smiled at her exhausted smile. Thank you, dear, but I'll go back to my mother's apartment. But no one lived there for several years. Can you imagine what's going on there? There's Mom, Vita. She's everywhere. In books, on the shelf, in frames for photos, in the air. And this is the only place on the whole earth where I want to be right now. She didn't notice how tears flowed out of her eyes. Vita just silently held her hand while she was crying out her pain and resentment. Finally, Lera decidedly wiped her tears with her palms and smiled weakly. So, stop feeling sorry for yourself. She clapped her hands on her hips. Let's ask for a bill. I need to go to the apartment and clean up there. I'll go with you, of course. But you have work. I'll ask for a leave. I'll call you right now. Vitya, with her fluffy hand, took out of the bottom of the bag the very last iPhone and dialed the boss number himself. Thank you, Lera whispered in silence while she was writing the story about a sore throat and a starting temperature. They brought the bill, and the girls, having paid, headed out. As soon as the door lock was locked and the strip of light fell on the floor of the hallway, Lera was worried. She almost never came here after her mother's death, and now she was not feeling well. When they entered, the girls felt the strange smell of an empty room. It smelled of sadness and emptiness. Lera, with her usual movements, turned on the light and went into the kitchen. The view followed her. There, as always, it was clean and tidy. The kitchen cabinet, given to the bride on the anniversary and slightly covered with dust, was almost empty. except for the boxes where the old Soviet tableware and Milchier tableware were stored. The door to the refrigerator was opened, as if someone had just taken out milk, and one of the chairs was moved out of the chair. Larry thought that now the steps in the corridor would be taken, and Mom would come in. They would all sit together, as it used to be, behind a round table. They'll pour tea with their souls and talk about the little things that actually make up life. Vito, having caught the mood of his girlfriend, was loud and started to make noise in the lockers in search of the kettle. While she was making noise in the kitchen, Lera went into the room. Everything remained the same here as it was with Mom. Simple but elegant shoes, which they glued together a week before they learned the terrible diagnosis. A ragged chandelier, decorated with a web. A tomb with a film telescope. Lera many times suggested to her mother to buy a flat modern television, but she always refused. The old Soviet wall, which occupied half of the room, was made up of books. Lera brought it to her face and breathed the scent of the perfume, which her mother always sprinkled on her wrist. Oh my God, how much she missed her. From her sad thoughts, her voice was distracted by Vida, who reported that she had brewed tea. Having found herself in the kitchen again, Lera discovered that her friend had already managed to wipe the dust, rinse the teapots and brew Princess Nuri, who was already found at the wall of the box on the sink. The girl smiled with gratitude. But what would I do without you? Really? What? She shook her shoulders, taking out a bag of chocolate. That's how she knew right away. Bought it in the morning in the subway. They quickly drank tea and, dressing in old, the girls sat down to rest. It remains to remove the curtains, and the most difficult thing is to wipe the books and the crystal in the wall. Oh, Lurka, you need it now. You know what? Vida mysteriously looked at her friend. What? Fall in love? What? Lera coughed out of surprise. That was not enough. No, right? You need good emotions now. The girl moved to her friend's room and took her by the hand, looking into her eyes. I'm worried about you. Lera thanked her for her hand and smiled. I can do it. You know I'm strong. Yeah, okay. Let's finish it already. They both, as if on a team, looked up at the bookshelves. They looked terrifying. Lera brought warm water to the basin, and they, armed with rags, began to carefully take books out of the shelves, wiping off the dust of another. From the school program, Olga Sergeyevna's special love was fed to German literature. Goff, Mangra, Reimark, even Patrick Suskind, and even his Faust and Lurs, thanks to their mother, knew almost nothing. Vida was singing something for herself, carrying the banners of war and peace. Behind her, already sprung up an impressive foot of freeloaders. She did everything clearly and quickly, unlike her friend. Lera, being in a strange nirvana, was given as a reminder, which was stored pages of these old and favorite books. She looked for it with her eyes. It was a big old book in German, dated and appeared in the house earlier than Lera herself. The girl felt a strange excitement. The yellowed pages were old and soft, somewhere cracked by time. She stroked the rough surface. Suddenly she felt that there was something among the pages. The girl licked them with her fingers and saw a small envelope, clamped between the TH and SD pages. Carefully taking it in her hands, Lera felt that in the envelope, in addition to the paper, there was something hard and heavy. Her hands were sweating from excitement. She looked at Vida, who did not pay any attention to her, and went to think whether to tell her or not. This is probably about her family. In the end, she decided. Vital, come here for a minute. Vika got distracted by the cleaning of the shingles and headed to her friend. What do you have here? Wow. She looked at the envelope. And what is this? A letter? Lera shook her shoulders. I don't know. Well, open it. Oh my God. Vika stood up, raising her hands to the side, and looked at her friend with such a look, as if she were a little girl. Lera nodded and opened the envelope. There was a piece of paper folded in half, and a small golden ring with a blue stone. Wow! Vitka jumped up in excitement. Lera, completely clueless, looked at the jewelry without much thought. She saw it for the first time and wondered where it came from, because they never had any secrets from their mother. The stone was pouring over thousands of migraines in the artificial light of the chandelier and looked like a real diamond. But where did the teacher of German ring with diamond come from? Lera was finally knocked down by the table. They sat down on the couch with a fork and began to look around for a strange find. On the inside of the rim, there was a short inscription on German. What's that H? Where did it come from? Oh, look, Ler. Vito pointed at a small icon on the same inner side of the rim, under the stone. It was either a probe or a coat, but very finely engraved. There's a magnifying glass. Ler was puzzled and turned to a friend. Well, to increase it, she explained in the form of her confusion. Although wait, she suddenly stood up and rushed to the hallway, and in a second she already photographed the ring on her iPhone camera. Having taken several photos, she maximally increased the image. Before them, the picture appeared with her eyes. A rose-winding dagger lying on the shield. Apparently, this is an old ring, Lera stated. There are no modern samples here. I wonder where he came from? I don't know. The girl said it with a thought. Suddenly she remembered a piece of paper that was in the same envelope. When she turned it over, she saw the handwriting of her mother. It was a letter written in German. In the upper left corner, Lera took out the semi-blown lines with the address. Reinhard Falls, Trier, Biverstrasse A, Schwarzenberg. Hiding her breath, Lera began to read, thanking the Lord for properly teaching German under the guidance of the best teacher in the world. Dear Alex, I will write you a letter again, which will probably remain in my books. And I apologize in advance. I'm sorry for you. I'm very sorry, but I couldn't help it. Believe me, I'm fully punished. For being away from you is the biggest pain in my life. You don't know much. Maybe it's for the best, otherwise your attempts to find me would still continue. I really want you to be happy. With love, Olga. Lera was silent. Tears flowed from her eyes. She simply did not know that this love message was written to Olga. Vitya took her away from her thoughts. Her eyes were also wet with revenge. How romantic. Lera, who is this Alex? Your mother's caretaker? She never told me about it. I was 10 when she wrote this letter. Papa died before I was born. Maybe they met later? Mom loved Papa very much. She never looked at anyone else. Who is this mysterious Alex? The screw was pulled with shoulders, and Lera thought. The letter said that it was not the first written and not sent. Maybe others will be found? Well, in the books. Let's look for it. The cleaning will wait. They spent 3 hours. It was dark outside for a long time. The rain turned into a shower outside the windows. But there were 2 more letters on the table in front of them. One was found in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, and the other in Tomic's Fatives. Lera's shaking hands turned the first leaf. He was 5 years older. The same address. The handwriting belonged to my mother, but it was more flying, stony. It was noticeable that a young girl was writing. My dear, another year has passed without you. I can't stand to think that you are so far away that another woman is next to you. I know, your mother dreamed of this wedding, but what torments were her dreams worth to me? Don't look for me. I lost myself long ago. Your Olga forever. Lera finished reading, and an awkward silence hung. Now I don't understand anything at all. Vitka rubbed her whiskers. Another year, Lera repeated. Another. So it was before? But how? I didn't know anything about it. I have a head in a circle. Read the second one. Vita was nervously staring at the sofa. Lera turned the last letter. The handwriting became different, tired and sad. July. A week later, Mom died. The girl closed her eyes. She suddenly got scared. What will she read in this paper? What secret will she discover? This is the last message. My dear Alex, this is my last letter. It is not destined to be forgotten, to look into your eyes again with hope. For long years without you, I have been deprived of the strength and desire to fight. I can't tell you how much I regret that I listened to the voice of my other people when I left your life. Perhaps you will never know that I have returned home with a priceless gift, for which I have tried to be happy all these years. This is our daughter, the fruit of that incredible and endless love that has always settled in my heart. Yes, I am to blame for what I have hidden from you. I ran away. I disappeared from your life. You were deprived of joy to be a father to Valeria, and she was deprived of fatherly care and love. Now I understand how stupid life has been, causing pain to yourself, to you, and Lera. She knows nothing, and I have no strength to tell her about it. Forgive me and goodbye, love of my whole life. Forever yours, Olga. The girls sat silently, looking into the void. The truth suddenly opened up so hard that they couldn't find the right words. Lera hardly recognized what was read. Yesterday morning, she calmly baked cookies in her garden kitchen. Everything in life was determined, understandable, and predictable. No secrets, no cheats, no letters. It seemed that years had passed since then. Well, what can I do? Lyra's silence violated. She was carrying priceless sheets of paper, which kept her appearance secret for the world. Vito, taking her hands in his, looked seriously at his girlfriend. Laris, do you realize what you just learned? You learned that you have a father, a real one, who doesn't know about you. What can you do here? Lera looked up at her. I really, really want to find him, but it may happen that he is already. Think about the good one. Her view overshadowed. And you are half German, it turns out. She laughed. Looking at the fun of a friend, Lera smiled at herself. The next hour they spent on finishing the cleaning and discussing grandiose plans for the reunion of the family. A couple of days later, Lera sat across from Igor at a huge table in the lawyer's office and signed the divorce papers. That's how, within 3 days, thanks to the communication of Maglaya Borisovna, she became a free woman. As a result of the divorce, she had personal things left, some jewelry and a sense of self-esteem, which she proudly carried to Vitka for work together with a bottle of champagne and a box of Ferrero Rocher. But that's it. Lera sighed when her friend met her at the office. 9 years of marriage remained in the past. Vitka hugged her tightly. Well, okay. I never liked him. It was pure truth. The mutual antipathy between husband and girlfriend always brought Lera to a complete confusion. Until the end of the working day, minutes. Will you wait? Vita led her to her office with millions of manuscripts lying everywhere. Yes, I have nowhere to rush, Lera said carelessly, clearing her place on a small sofa. She liked the atmosphere of Vita's office. There lived creativity. Thousands of pieces of paper, written in small fonts, which contained many stories, thoughts, and experiences. A bunch of new names, addresses, booklets, and notes, which were pasted here and there, on the computer monitor, system block, and the cabinet walls. The Amadei Publishing House was considered one of the best in the region, and a view with its artistic taste and innate literacy found its calling there on the editor's post. Lera herself, who had graduated from the Department of Landscape Design, dreamed of creating landscape masterpieces somewhere in a warm region, where there are no colds and blizzards. Instead, she became a lonely, unemployed housewife, and also divorced from her husband. From these thoughts, she was in a bad mood. She took the first manuscript from the table and didn't notice how it was read. Oh, the earth is calling Lera. She heard the voice of her friend above her very ear. She was already dressed in her dress. Lurko jokingly called her favorite cashmere poncho and held Larina's coat in her hands. The friends left the noisy publishing house and dived into the thick October twilight. The first stars had already lit up in the sky. It was dark and clear, without a hint of rain. It smelled of Central Park and escorted by a flock of migratory birds. Clicking the lock, Lera opened the door to her mother's apartment. Now there was a completely different smell here. There were boxes of clothes everywhere, which smelled of Lera's favorite perfume, shoes, and cosmetics. The last truth was very little, because the girl preferred natural beauty, half filled with food, and in the vase on the table, the grapes were lying in a picturesque nature. The girls ordered pizza, and when it was brought, they dug up champagne. "To your new life," said the short but full-bodied toast Vita. "To the search for a father," Lera thoughtfully added. They rang the bell and squashed the spilling liquid. "By the way, what are you planning to do?" "To look for a job." Vitka put grapes in her mouth. "First, my father. But I don't know where to start. I don't even have a visa, and my passport is probably expired. Besides, I need to understand what capital I have now. I think I should visit Lombard." Vita giggled. "Lombard? Do you want to sell the tats that your ex-husband gave you?" "Yes, while I have no other options. In my wallet, a couple of thousand cash, the same amount on the card, and what to do with them. There are a lot of expenses, utilities, food, travel, again, not to mention the money for the registration of a new foreign passport, visas, buying tickets." Lera drank a sip of champagne. "Well, with money, of course, I can't help much, but I will give you a piece of advice." Lera looked at her friend in wonder. "I would be angry. I actually just threw him away." With Roman Murantsev, Lera went through what is called the first love. It was an amazing year. Their 11th grade. Notes and notebooks, looks, secret smiles, long walks in the evenings. The first kiss in the autumn rain when he was taking her home after the autumn ball. Exactly years ago. And after that was the graduation, the first adult dawn of their very first time. All these pictures, like shots from a movie, suddenly flashed before Lera's eyes. An unforeseen lump appeared in his throat. They parted so unambiguously. Lera went to Ulyanovsky State Institute for Design faculty, and Roma to Moscow Academy of Arts. Distance, night calls, rare meetings on vacations. Unanswered and sometimes unread messages gave the girl an idea that everything was over. A year later, Roma's parents died in a car accident. His younger sister was taken to the village of his grandmother, and his visits to his hometown completely stopped. Both of them began a new life, and Igor, a handsome and smart family, appeared in Lera's life. That her son-in-law had become Igor, not Roman. One day they met, and this meeting barely deprived Lera of her reason. It was her wedding day. He knocked on the door. Then the girl heard her mother snorting in the hallway. She was carrying a wedding dress with bandages. She came out of the room and stalled. Her first love was standing in front of her, with a huge bouquet of roses. They looked at each other, living these years of separation, regretting the time we have missed. Romka said nothing, just gave her flowers and left. Lera helplessly went down to the poof in the hallway and closed her eyes. She had never experienced such pain before. She wanted to throw this dress away and run after him, but she didn't do it. "Ler, what are you doing?" "Out of the—" "I know, we call each other sometimes." "What? And you were silent?" Lera glared at her. The view was indescribably sublime. "Well, you were happy with your husband, household. You were going to have children. Why are you so early to take care of the child?" Of course, she was right, but Lera experienced something. All these years they kept in touch. He asked about me. The girl was overwhelmed by the emotions that she, as she tried, could not hide. The screw was shaking her head negatively. "You are a forbidden subject. So he doesn't want to talk to me, especially to help." The friend who was encouraging stroked her on the hand. "And for some reason it doesn't seem so to me. Call him." She took out her phone, and the next second, The message with the contact of Roman Muromtsev lit up on Lera's display. Thank you. Lera went forward and hugged Vito. When they said goodbye, it was almost midnight. It's good that tomorrow is Saturday, otherwise Vito would have to spit all day at work. She was afraid to dial the number until death, but the desire to hear his voice again was unbearable. His beautiful face appeared before her during their last meeting. His gray eyes were filled with pain and regret. Oh, how well she remembered this expression, the deep look that left a huge scar in her heart. Finally, she suffered. She fell into a deep, restless sleep. She dreamed of her mother, school, Ramka, a whole kaleidoscope of events and memories. In the morning, she woke up with terrible headache. Having written down everything she had drunk the day before, the girl quickly ran to the shower and, having poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table in the kitchen, putting her phone in front of her. For 10 minutes, she hypnotized him with her gaze, then gathered together with her spirit and quickly dialed the number. Even if he didn't pick up the phone, she thought about herself. Hello? The voice with a squeak, from which the goosebumps ran through her body, answered her. Lera's hands were sweaty, and she barely dropped her phone. What to say? Hi, Roma. A long pause hung, and Larry thought she would hear short lips now. Apparently, he recognized her. Lera, is that you? Me. She didn't know what to say. Didn't expect to hear you. Romana's voice was restless and calm. How are you? Okay, how are you? The girl barely recovered her breathing. Her heart beat like crazy. It was better this way. Roma whistled and without any whispers asked, What happened to you? What do you mean? Lera didn't understand. In the sense that we haven't talked for years, and now you're calling. And in this sense, she just repeated it and thoughtfully immediately scolded herself for it. Actually, a lot happened. She wanted to tell him everything so much that before the brain managed to react, she fell out. We can meet. And she immediately got scared of her words. A short pause hung, then the answer followed. When and where? Coffee shop under the maple. Tomorrow at a.m. And Roma put the phone down. Lera stood on the squeaking phone as if her ears had grown. Did she really set up a meeting? Yes. Did he agree? Yes. The tea cooled. Lera poured it into the sink and, mechanically washed the cup, put it in the refrigerator. What are you doing? The view of the Vist was disillusioned by the delight when her friend told her about the morning conversation with Roma. That evening they sat again in the Lera kitchen and drank a dissolved coffee with melted milk. An abomination in the view, but the day before, Lera bought a cappuccino and whipped them a wonderful milk foam. Isoric black liquid turned into an appetizing drink. That's how she smiled shyly. Tomorrow is the meeting. Well done. The view was a sip from the saw, and the foam on her upper lip was left with funny mugs. What will you go to? Lera shook her shoulders. She had not yet thought, to be honest. And you think you should look as good as possible. And as maximum, the girl laughed. If you're going to the maximum, you have to look like a woman he can't live without. The man sitting at the table in the coffee shop was so well acquainted with Larry that she hardly suppressed the man who had formed a mountain of Lechem. A well-built figure, a beautiful, manly face, gray eyes and cheeks on cheeks when he smiled. He strolled on the table and rubbed his hands. Oh, those hands. They hugged and caressed her once. Lera realized that she was sweating. Has she not been sick all these years? She was surprised at herself. Dressed in tight jeans, a boha shirt, and married Cossacks, she felt confident a minute ago. But now all the confidence has disappeared somewhere. However, having gained courage, she headed to the table. Seeing her, Roma froze for a moment, then he went up to the meeting. Hello. He was awkwardly stumbling. Hello. Lera smiled. Thank you for coming. He was also wearing jeans and a shirt, only unlike her, his shirt was strict, as was his silverish gaze. They sat opposite each other. Lera understood that he was waiting for her actions, but could not decide. Roma looked at her as if she were the only one on earth. Well, she got the courage. You were waiting for explanations. He just shook his shoulders. By the way, this is for you. And he stretched her a bouquet of margaritas. Oh my God, where did you get them? The girl was sincerely surprised. October in the yard. You're a funny, honest word. He even laughed, and in his voice she heard long-forgotten, but familiar, unobtrusively intonations. In addition to October, the SD century is still in the yard. Exactly, she muttered and smiled. So what did you want to tell me? Roma leaned on the back of the sofa. Maybe we'll order something first? Come on. She forgot what it was like to be next to him, to talk, to see how he smiles and squinted his eyes. The waitress ordered 2 lattes and a couple of blue cheesecakes, and they were left alone again. Roma looked her in the face. But tell me, I'm worried myself. Lera looked up and shivered at the fact that his hand lay on top of her palm. She felt the heat pouring over her whole body, whether from embarrassment and fear, or from the sudden excitement that came. I developed the day before yesterday. The girl wanted to say something completely different, but it was exactly what she said. But you probably already know. I know. He just said his palm was still on her hand. Well, there's no point in telling you about the past, because you know it, I think. Then the main thing. Do you remember what I told about my father? He nodded. So, this is all not true. He was not an engineer at all, as his mother said. He was a foreigner. More precisely, a German, with whom his mother met in youth. They fell in love with each other. She got pregnant and left him for reasons that I don't know. He knows nothing about me, and I know nothing about him. I found out about it myself a couple of days ago when I found a letter from my mother, which she wrote to him, but did not send. Roma looked at her, carefully listening and nodding, and Lera continued. I only have an address and a name. Alex Schwarzenberg. That's a lot. Roma summed it up. I looked on social networks. Yeah, nothing like that, or rather, something that suits me. So, you want me to break through this information through the service channels? She nodded. Romana suddenly got sad. So, I was hoping for nothing that you just wanted to see me. She burst into tears. Of course, I wanted to, but I was ashamed. I was afraid to death that you would hold a grudge, that you wouldn't forgive. He looked at her, and his eyes suddenly shone. I forgave for a long time. Actually, I shouldn't have been offended, because I was to blame for our breakup. But I was in such a mess. Everything was overflowing. Education, parents' loss. Sveka remained almost in my hands, because my grandmother was sick already then. I didn't take into account that you also need attention. It seemed to me that you would wait as long as I needed. I didn't have the right to think that way. The traitorous tear crawled down my pale cheek, as if a huge slug fell from the soul after his confession. I waited, Rom. Just when you were completely gone, I thought that you no longer needed me, and decided to live on. And when you came on the day of my wedding, I wanted to run after you. But she didn't. Because of Igor. Because of Mom. He looked at her with all his eyes, as he did years ago. And that look was amazing. They brought them in order to somehow distract themselves. Lera drank a sip of aromatic liquid. Lurka. Roma looked at the sky with a smile. You haven't changed at all. I didn't let you out of the picture. Vitya and I often talked on the phone during these years. And she told me everything about you, even though I didn't ask. And I'm very grateful to her for that. We will definitely find your father. It will only take time. I don't work in the authorities right now. Why? The girl was surprised and raised her eyebrows. You dreamed of this almost from the first grade. I worked there, but not for long. Grandma died, Svetka got sick, oncology, and I had to quit to devote all my time to her. I have no one except my sister. Lera was stunned. She remembered Romka very well, But the younger sister, the rosy girl with light braids and silverish eyes like her brother, Sveka has oncology. The girl repeated this word as if she didn't believe it. Roma nodded. Sarcoma. It requires transplantation of the bone brain, but it costs just a lot of money. I took a loan for the support therapy, but the work of the guard in the shop still does not cover all expenses. But you shouldn't worry about it, he warned Lera. Oh my God, Roma, I want to help with something. He shook his head. I'm afraid you can't help with anything. I can see her. I can come visit you. You want to come visit? Roma asked. Right? Of course, Lera was relieved. If you don't mind. He smiled and touched the edge of the glass with his finger, which had cooled latte. Actually, I don't mind. But Sveka won't please you. Why? Lera was surprised, but immediately thought, ah, I see. I'll find something to say. Well, then we can go right now, if you're not busy, of course. It's just that I have a day off today, and I promised my sister a walk in the park. I'm free. Then we went. He put the pin on the table and gave Lera his hand. Having taken her wardrobe number, Roma confidently walked to the exit, and the girl, grabbing the margarita and the bag, hurried after him. None of them touched the cheesecake. When they got into Roman's car, Lera asked him to drive her home. There she pulled out her favorite Italian towel from the closet and, putting it in a bag, flew out of the apartment. Where are we going? The girl asked in wonder when they drove past the street where Muramtsevs used to live. The outside of the city, answered Roma, including the turnstile. When Sveka got sick, we sold the apartment to our parents and bought a small house in the suburb area to be closer to nature. There is fresh air, a river, beauty. He glanced at his satellite. Did you change your mind to go? I just asked. Lera was embarrassed and stood in front of the window. They were driving silently almost all the way to the village of Mikhailovka. Finally, Roman Larga stopped near a small house, surrounded by white siding and white, spruce tree fence. Obviously, all his charm was left here in the bare grass of the glade, covered with fallen leaves, in a fiery red rowan by the porch, in the aroma of the ripe Antonovka, which Lera sensed as soon as she left the car. Near the fence, on a dried bench, the birch spread out in the household, decorated with gold and copper, carefully hand-painted in September. Roma opened the door to the gate, letting the guest. A huge, fluffy dog flew out with a happy bark. Lera screamed out of surprise, and the animal began to sniff her hands with a grumbling pack. Look, I recognized you. Pocket. And you? He turned to the girl. You don't recognize? Lera sat on a mat near the dog's wagging tail. Sherlock. Really? He should be now, yes. She remembered how they walked together. Then still a very stupid puppy, on the embankment in the Park of Friendship of Peoples. Since then, he has changed a lot. However, one thing remained the same. Light character and cheerful temper. Lera hugged the dog for a fluttering head and smiled. Suddenly, such nostalgia fell on her. That sweetly sucked under the spoon. They stroked Sherlock with Roma and looked at each other. We have guests? A woman's voice came from somewhere. Young people raised their heads together. On the porch, dressed in warm suits with fur and a knitted hat, stood a very thin and pale girl. The bruises under her eyes and a dull look.
Jake Irit.
Lera, as she stood up, straightened up and smiled. Sveta looked at her for 10 seconds, then turned around and entered the house. Don't pay attention, calmed Roma. I'll be here for a minute. He quickly stepped into the house and hid behind the door. Lera became inexpressibly lonely. Sherlock first poked her in the palm with a wet nose. Then he just lay down. Obviously, he spent all his energy on meeting an old friend, and now he just stretched, struggling and hard to breathe, right across the path. It got cold. The wind came up from nowhere, bringing the nasty frost. And Lera regretted that she didn't put on a hat and her leather jacket didn't have a hood. But then the door opened and Roma came out. Seeing her, who had fallen asleep from the cold, he practically grabbed her in the mouth and dragged her into the house. You are completely frozen. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, please. I just had to tell her. Standing in the sun, he rubbed her forearms with his palms and looked so sad that Larry became hot. Surprised by her own courage, she suddenly hugged him around her neck and he immediately replied to the kiss, first gently and unconfidently, then impulsively, passionately. They would probably be standing there in the shadows, wasting their time. But the door in the house was opened, and a ridiculous voice said, "Come on in already." Oh my God. I heard a knock and everything was quiet. Obviously, Svetka realized what was bothering her and hurried too. Lera barely pulled herself off of Roma's lips and hit her face on his neck. She suddenly wanted to laugh and jump. He was hugging her waist and breathing heavily. "What are you doing?" He whispered to her hair. "You want my death?" She only nodded her head negatively. "Okay, let's go." Roma smiled. And then Svetka got hit. They went into the small hallway. It smelled of fresh wood and something delicious, reminiscent of my grandmother's childhood. "We need to heat the stove," Delavita said to Sveta, going out to meet them. "It's cold at home." Her cheeks were still burning with embarrassment, and Lera also blushed. Now, Roma took the guest jacket and went to do the laundry. "Hello." Sveta looked at Lera. "Come in." The girl nodded and walked into the room, where the owner of the house was putting firewood in a large hall, standing in the middle of the room. "Everything is so beautiful." Sveta was already gazing at her with a peaceful smile. "Thank you. And you are so cute." Lera smiled, sitting on a creaking couch. They both laughed, and the ice was broken. Very soon the room was filled with the sounds of cracking trunks. Lera looked around. In the room where they sat there were two more doors, obviously in the bedroom. The situation was more than modest. It was a thought of a measured, not cunning life in some kind of peace. Of the modern things, the guest noticed a TV, a vacuum cleaner. This whole atmosphere took her somewhere in the distance, and Roma, mistakenly looking at her, explained, "Having sold the apartment, we bought this house because it was cheap, and the remaining money was used to make a surgery for Svetka. Plus, it was enough for several more chemistry courses. You haven't been in the kitchen yet. Let's eat already. I woke up today with an appetite." "You can't stand by the stove." The older brother got all grumpy. "What are you doing there?" "I didn't do anything. I just put the chicken with potatoes in the oven, so don't get upset. Foie gras won't be today." She turned around like a busybody and disappeared in the doorway. Lera got up from the couch. "I'll go help her." It's great that she didn't lose her sense of humor. She looked at Roma with a smile and went to get Sveta. They had a quiet family lunch, without talking loudly and touching each other. Remembering that she came with empty hands, Lera gave Sveta an Italian silk scarf. She thanked her warmly and, tearing off the tricotage cap from her bald head, went to the mirror to try it on. They silently watched as thin fingers. They hurriedly tie up the mottled knot on the top of the head, and a completely different light came back to them from the table. Women are happy. Even the bluish man appeared. Lera did not notice how time flew by, and it began to twinkle outside the window. The rain intensified. Roma looked at her with tension as if he wanted to say something. It was too late. Lera met his gaze. "I need to go home." "I'll take you home." He said it with disappointment. "I'll just warm up the car." "Stay with us." Sveta grabbed her hand. "You don't need to go anywhere tomorrow." Roma froze halfway. Lera was confused. On the one hand, she really wanted to stay. On the other, she was afraid to force the event. They just met. So many years later. No, I can't today. Maybe next time?" And seeing disappointed Svetka in the face, she added, "Come on, you better come to me." I really have less housing, but between us girls, you will find a place to sleep. Understanding that the contracts are useless. Lera, don't leave him anymore, do you hear? The girl stopped and looked at her with all her eyes. He loves you, still. If you don't plan to be with him, leave now and never come back. He won't survive the second time. Lera suddenly realized that the moment of truth had come, when she had no right to lie, to be indifferent, to turn away. The question was put clearly and suggested a direct and honest answer. I will never hurt him. Never. I love him too. Just don't tell him about it yet. Svetka nodded. Her face relaxed and she finally let off Lera's hand. Roma waited for her in the car. When she left the gate, he got out of the cabin and she looked around, unable to look him in the eye. Closing the door, he returned to his place. Thank you. For what? Didn't understand the girl. For Sveta. I haven't seen her so happy and alive for a long time. It's just great. I'm very glad I was able to help with something, Lera said sincerely. The rain was pouring down the windshield. The radio was buzzing. They were driving along a slippery road, and the atmosphere in the cabin seemed to be electrified to the limit. Suddenly, Roma slowed down and drove off to the side. Turning off the ignition and putting the car on the handbrake, he bowed to Larry and, pulling her by the neck, he spat into her lips. She gave her power over her and stopped where her heart was beating so fast. Her own heart, her bare, beating ribs, seemed to be about to jump out of her chest. Finally, Roma broke away from her. It was as if these years had passed. He barely breathed a melon. How I wish they had never happened, she muttered in response. Lera lost the opportunity to think. I just looked at his face and dissolved in it. They say that first love is the strongest, the most unforgettable, and in her case, apparently, it is also the only one. All the years of life with Igor suddenly seemed to her like a farce, a performance in which she played a role. She was real here, now, in this car, with this man. They looked at each other, getting closer again. Here he is again touching her lips. From a sweet memory, a phone call tore them apart. After 5 seconds of thinking about what was happening, Lera still understood that the phone was squeaking in her bag. Taking the phone, she heard the angry voice of the fork. Mother of my woman, what are you thinking about yourself? I can't reach you all day. Vita, calm down. I'm fine. I'm glad for you. The girl barely spoke. And I have a heart attack. You're not home. You don't answer the phone. What should I do? Where are you? I'm with Roma. There was a little pause. Well, Vita's voice became softer. Then you're forgiven. Say hello and call me when you have time. Just don't drag it too much. And she hung up. Lera smiled at Roman, pressing her shoulders. I heard everything. He laughed, and barely deafened. Why did she get so scared? Lera said, worried about me. Let's go. Well, let's go. Roma started the engine, and they hurriedly moved along the wet highway. Near her apartment door they kissed again. He refused to come to the invitation because he did not want to leave his sister alone for a long time. Right in the entrance, having recorded the data of Alex Schwarzenberg and his address, he said goodbye to Lera and left. Having found Lera's house, she ran to the shower, snuggled into the bed, and typed the Vita number and told her about the events of the day. Sometimes I insert phrases like, wow, and I'm shocked. They chatted for about an hour until a text message from Roma came. Thank you for this day. Lera smiled at herself and, closing her eyes, instantly fell asleep. It was quiet in the Lombard, if not to count the ticking of huge old clock, standing as a decoration not far from the counter. There were many things under the glass on the window, from earrings and rings to cameras and video recorders, brought here by people in need of money. Lera felt extremely uncomfortable and insecure. In her bag was everything she got from Igor after the divorce. They were supposed to meet at her house with Vita, because she was the only one to walk down the street with such valuable things. It was scary, but the friend was detained at work. She was simply shy to call Roma. Behind the counter, a skinny man with thick lenses and glasses met her, like a leprechaun. She laid out everything she brought in front of him, namely a pair of gold earrings with diamonds, a platinum ring with A. It certainly didn't cost much, but Lera didn't want to leave it. Suddenly the front door slammed, and she, with relief, saw the swollen view. Hello. She literally rolled into the barn, in a rush, folding the umbrellas and shaking like a wet dog. Well, the weather. Hello. Lera waved at her. You are very on time. The man behind the counter dangerously bowed at the door, obviously thinking, what could it be? Vitya guessed his thoughts and, familiarly bowing at the counter, playing with a low voice, said, no, that's it. We don't expect anyone else. Well, great. The joke was made. Let's get started. Half an hour later, the girls came out in the pouring rain, happy and pleasantly surprised. The money they had saved for the jewelry. It should be enough for the first time without work and in search of a father and on a trip to Germany. Here is the payment for my unsuccessful family life, Lera joked, pressing a money bag on her. A taxi that was ordered next to them stopped next to them, and the friends hurried to him. While they were driving to Lera's apartment, Roma called. Hello. She heard his low voice in the phone. Hello. The girl didn't notice how her face, of course, floated in a smile. The screw rolled over her eyes and turned to the window. There's news about your father. So fast? She was surprised. Yes. There was silence in the tube, and inside Ler's body, everything was cold. He died? No, what are you talking about? He's alive. Ler's tears suddenly flowed. That she was afraid to drop her phone. You can come and tell everything. Yes, only in a couple of hours you need to take the medicine from the branch. Okay, thank you. Vitya anxiously looked at her friend. Well, what's there? Vitya, he's alive. Lera laughed through the sob. My father is alive. The friend looked at her, and tears flowed from her eyes too. The girls hugged each other as they continued to cry. The taxi driver looked confused in the rearview mirror and thought whether to tell them something encouraging or not to get involved in this confusing matter. The girls were sitting in the kitchen, and in front of them there was a bubble with a valerian on the table. Time went on endlessly, so when the doorbell rang, they both broke out of place. Oh, Vito, hello? Roma smiled when they opened the door for him. What are you doing? He froze, looking at the excited faces of the girls. Come on in, Vito commanded. Don't worry, we're already dying of impatience. The young man clung to the narrow hallway, which, it turned out, as soon as he straightened out, the fork pushed him into the kitchen and sat him down at the table. Seeing Valerianka, Roma smiled. It seems I missed everything. Both girls looked at him with such a look that he quickly opened the folder that was in his hand and took out several sheets of paper written in small fonts. Having stretched them out, he said. Lera carefully took the documents and sat down on the chair. The forces suddenly left her. Her head was spinning. Don't worry, you're so, said Vika. Read it. And she started reading. An essay from the Dwarven Roses Registry of Germany. Alexander Manfred von Schwarzenberg, Prince in the th generation. Date of birth: June. Born place Germany, Reinhard Pfalz, Trier.
Parenz Hans Friedrich von Schwarzenberg and Birgit Elisabeth von Schwarzenberg, born Kaiser.
Education: Higher Humanities, Specialties, History, International Relations. Events and documents that told the short story of life of Prince von Schwarzenberg. Lera stopped reading. She was in confusion and confusion. Her father is a prince? And in the 12th generation? Unbelievable. Oh, Mom, how could you hide all this from me? She thought with grief. Vita violated the silence in the kitchen. Now you should be called Your Radiance. No more, no less. She laughed. Vita, stop it. I can't believe it. Is this true? She turned to Roma. He stubbornly nodded. And there are no photos? With hope, she asked. Alas, no. That's all I could find. Lera called out, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you. No problem. He answered, and for some reason he was sad. He watched as she was engulfed in the news about her origin and suddenly thought that in her life there would be no place for him again. But, celebrating the shame, slapping himself on his knees and getting up from the stool, if you don't need me anymore, I'll go. Lera scaredly grabbed him by the hand. The tactical fork came out of the kitchen. Wait, don't go away, please. Lera, he looked straight into her eyes. I'm not a fool. I know that you will now go looking for your father, and that's right. But you will not come back here. You will leave me again. And I don't want to die again from the sadness over you. Let me go now. Please. She looked at him without looking away. I can't. I can't lose you again like last time. And if you leave now, I'll follow you. And I don't care how it looks. You need to think. You have another interesting fate ahead of you. And in my life there is nothing but work, hospital rooms, and debts for treatment from Svetka. He held her in his hands. And in the silver eyes the sadness of the whole world was splashing. But I also want to be in your life. Yes, I will find my father, but he may not want to see me. Who knows? And if he wants, it will not change anything. I can't let you go. At that moment they heard the knock at the front door. This screw went home, leaving them alone. Without believing what she had just said, she looked at him so open and sincere. Her lips opened, cheeks blushed. Don't tempt me. Rom, I've been asking you for a few minutes. She was so excited. In the end, I must keep the feeling of my own dignity. He smiled and brought his face closer to her. She immediately hugged his neck. Lurko. He pressed his forehead against hers. You understand that I still can't breathe when you're around. I can say the same thing. She whispered in response. Damn you. Break him again. What? Didn't you understand, girl? My heart. He laughed nervously. I can't refuse to keep you in my arms now, to kiss you until you grow up, like in our first time at the graduation ceremony. Remember? She nodded. After a moment of rest, he grabbed her by the hand, took her to the room and carefully laid her on the couch. Time stopped. As if there had been no years of separation. There were only two lovers, a man and a woman, who were longing for each other so much that the world around them ceased to exist. This evening belonged only to them, and there, whatever happens. The appointment of a new foreign passport and Schengen visa took 1.5 months. During this time, Lera and Roma got closer and practically did not part. Lera often went to Mikhailovka and walked with Svetka for a long time. Fortunately, the weather got better. At the end of November, the days became clear, frosty. Finally, a ticket to one end of Moscow-Frankfurt was purchased, and Lera started packing. As her departure approached, Romka became all closed and gloomy. He didn't answer the phone for a long time, disappeared somewhere, and once declared to Larry drunk in a fit of rage. She had never seen him like that. Without saying a word and putting him to sleep on the couch, she sat for a long time and looked into his own face. Deep in her soul, she understood the reason for his behavior, but could not change anything. She was waiting for this trip with excitement and impatience, and he had to understand these feelings. In the end, we are talking about her father. When she woke up in the morning, Roma apologized for a long time and left without even kissing her goodbye. The flight was scheduled for December, and Roma called to bring her from Ulyanovsk to Moscow by car. Lera did not object, because she wanted to spend more time with him, talk. As soon as he gets to know his father and gets to know him better, the tension between them in the last few days has become unbearable. Roma was grumpy and unnumerous, and the day before the departure he simply grabbed her by the ear right in the elevator and squeezed her with such force that her ribs barely crumbled. That night they were engaged in love, and in the morning he became distant and alien again. Lera was very upset because of this. She was also worried about how Roma would react to the envelope with money that she left on the eve of the wedding. The amount was small, but it would be enough to cover the monthly expenses for the medicine. When they said goodbye to her, Lera took the girl's vow and promised not to tell Roma anything. She looked at her husband's face seriously. "I won't leave you." She just nodded and, with a sigh, hugged Lera tightly for a farewell. The road from Ulyanovsk to Moscow took them hours. During all this time, they barely exchanged dozens of phrases with each other. Roma looked at the road with tension. He looked at the road and looked at the road. He looked at the road and looked at, pressing Laren's hand in his hand. The words were superfluous. Both understood it. They arrived in Moscow at a.m. The departure was scheduled for a.m. At Sheremetyevo Airport, as always, there was a crowd of diverse people. In a terrible day, Lera and Roma walked through the crowd with their suitcases to the registration desk. They had just a few minutes left to say goodbye. Roma looked at Lera with longing. "Lurka, you're slipping again." Lurka sadly said, "I'll be back, I promise." She hugged him in a rush, putting him on a chain, and pressed his lips. Their breath mixed. They announced Lera's flight, barely breaking away from him, waving his tears, heading towards his past. On the plane, she calmed down a little and got ready to fly. It took 3 hours to fly to Frankfurt, and she had time to think about her actions. When she thought that she might be an unwanted guest in her father's house, she was nervous again. He did not know that his lover was pregnant, and even more so that now he has an adult daughter. Perhaps he is happily married, and he has other children. And it may well happen that she has brothers and sisters. The turbines rumbled, the plane flew forward. So he took off from the ground and, gaining height, he raced Lera away from Rome. Straight into the unknown, she thought. Frankfurt Airport, the largest in Europe, was like an ant. And registration booth. Everything around was decorated for Christmas, and in each waiting room there were even Santa Claus photo zones. Lera thought about Romy, who was now going back to Ulyanovsk. When she got her phone, she tried to catch Wi-Fi to send him a WhatsApp message. When she connected to the network, she typed a short text. "I've arrived. I'm already bored." The answer came from Roma. "Me too." The answer seemed dry and simple to her, but her mood was ruined. However, the girl still took herself in her hands and went to get her luggage, without forgetting to send a message to the Vitya. From the airport, she got to the railway station by taxi, where she got on the train. She had several changes in directions and after all, she spent the previous night on the road. In addition, she was tired of the flights related to the trip of 3 waves. Sitting by the window, she watched the unusual landscapes flash out of the window. Rocky hills, covered with tunnels and thick forest glade. Windmills, valleys with a bunch of tiny villages. Industrial zones with huge warehouses and hangars. Old castles on the tops of the mountains. Old Catholic churches with skull-like roofs. Lurie has always liked the unique comfort of old Europe, with its cute houses, generous greenery, and kindness of the indigenous residents. There was order everywhere. It seemed that the residents were specially prepared for the arrival of some important guest. The caravan where Lera was going was crowded. It was mainly young people in jeans, multi-caliber jackets, and Christmas caps, as well as representatives of East Asia and God knows what other sides of the world. After 2 overpasses, the girl finally got on the train to Trier. It's a pity that she didn't take care of the hotel, because she literally fell off her feet. She would now like to fall on any little-like surface of the bed. In addition, she was unbearably hot in a coat and warm boots, which seemed too light to her in snowy Moscow. Finally, after a long flight and 3 changes on the train, Lera was standing in the center of the Trier station hall with 2 suitcases and a confused face. They apologized in a hurry, smiled, congratulated on the coming Christmas. It was completely clear to her that today she had to sleep somewhere and gather her thoughts before going to the cherished address. In addition, the girl was simply dying of hunger because she ate for the last time on the plane, and since then a considerable amount of hours have passed. She left the station building. In the city twilight, the cool winter air breathed in and thought that somewhere in this city, thousands of kilometers from her home, lives her father, the only one. Her mother's letters and ring with a ring on the case were in her bag, if he doesn't believe her. Thinking that she needs to stop somewhere, she asked the cute woman at the bus stop where the nearest hotel is located. After minutes, she was already at the reception desk in a small hotel on Buldenstrasse, not far from the station. Having taken the keys from the party, she was interested whether it was possible to order dinner in the room, and, having received a confirmation answer, she headed for the elevator. Having left the third floor, tired and hungry, Lera looked for her number and literally fell into it. After taking off her coat and shoes, she fell on a large two-bedroom bed covered in a lilac blanket. For a good 5 minutes, she was calm, and her thoughts were spinning in her head. The room was quite modest, but clean and tidy. The lavender tones were preserved in the lilac, and the color of the elephant bone was covered with modern furniture. It resembled Lera Province, where she once visited with her ex-husband. The girl quickly took a shower, in which she happily discovered soft slippers and a fluffy wavy dress, and wearing them, ran to open the door. They brought dinner. Quickly, having cut herself with French fries, fried with chicken mushrooms and a sparse salad, she took a cup of aromatic tea in her hands and, right in the dress, went out to the balcony, hidden behind the curtain. In front of her, a blackened alley was spread out, lit by lanterns that bowed over her with blackened heads. Trier was not a big city, but it was very crowded on the streets. Christmas illumination shone everywhere and overflowed. Bells rang, music played. Lera thought that this was a fabulous time. This atmosphere, as impossible, more appropriate, symbolizes the beginning of something new and good in her life. She returned to her room and lay down in bed. Having taken out the mother's letter from her bag, she reread them again and pressed them against her face. It seemed to her that they still kept the warmth and smell of the one that would never write anything to anyone again. The eyes began to blind and, with incredible effort, by clicking the light switch, Lera fell asleep. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was already high. It crawled through the lavender curtains and left a light strip on the floor. Lera hung her legs from the bed and, barefoot, slipped to the window and closed the balcony door. A frosty. Then, putting the letter back in the bag, she wrapped herself up and left the room. In the corridor, near the elevator, there was a large mirror, and the girl with approval looked at her reflection. She was wearing beige trousers, a cashmere sweater in tone, a painted brown loafers with large earrings, and an Italian handkerchief with ornament and brushes. And only the hairstyle made some resonance in this elegant look. The dark hair didn't want to lie down neatly. Thinking that it was even more natural, Lera went down. Near the reception, she noticed a bus stop with drivers and bought one. A tourist card was embedded in it, and when she opened it, the girl realized that it was better not to find her, with detailed names and numbers. After going to the hotel restaurant, she ordered a cup of cappuccino for herself. She didn't want to eat, because everything inside was shaking from the nervousness that had rolled up. She thought about Romy. He's probably already at work, or he's running away with Sveta for another procedure. Having decided not to write anything to him, she decided to study the map. For about half an hour, the waiter brought coffee, but Lera couldn't help but feel so anxious. Having stood out from the table, she went outside with relief. She was greeted by a beautiful, cool European morning in all its festive splendor. She looked at the map, and it seemed she was required to first pass a mysterious place called Porta Nigra to cross the pedestrian bridge over the Moselle River, if you believe the map, and then reach Luxembourg by hand. Well, it's not surprising. Here in Europe, everything is small. Lera smiled at her thoughts. After walking a couple of streets, she found herself in front of an impressive structure of an old warehouse, similar to a burned-down fortress. Porta Nigra confirmed her guess by the guide. Behind it, a huge shopping street with many shops, stalls, and restaurants was spread out. Lera would have walked along it at another time, but not today. After passing a few more streets, a couple of churches and shopping centers, she came to the picturesque embankment, connected with the opposite bank with an ancient wide bridge. On that side of the river were hills, in one of which her father lived. Below the bridge there was a large pier where boats and yachts stood for fun. The river flowed slowly as if in a half-sleep, near the edge of the shores, slightly curled up by ice. Lera walked along the bridge at the same slow pace, for her heart was beating so fast that it seemed to the girl that she was about to lose her feelings. And in front of it, cozy villas with high fences were beautifully spread out. Lera easily found the right address. It was quite simple, because the Schwarzinger residence was one of the most prominent on this small German Beverly Hills. In front of it, a massive, mature stone fence was built, in the middle of which there were the same huge cast-iron gates. Behind them was the flying garden or park, slightly silvered by the morning wash. The climate in these areas was quite mild, and Lera noticed that on some trees in the city the buds had already bloomed. The old house with a brick roof was beautiful, built in the style of a late Baroque. Even during this time of year, surrounded by a flying garden and covered with a dry plume, it looked romantic and picturesque. She stood next to the gate and did not dare to ring the bell. Her father, her ancestors, lived here. Here, probably, the story of love that had been long in life began, as a result of which she appeared in the light. Lera was caught by a strange feeling. She wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. Fear of the unknown turned every nerve into a stretched string. She noticed how a man appeared on the paved gravel road. He was about years old. He was pretty well built, light-skinned. He had a dog, a small Yorkshire Terrier, some kind of Nightia. That it was not just a servant walking out a dog. He had light trousers, a white-haired sweater, and a striped scarf. He reminded the girl of Harry Potter, for he had glasses with round lenses on his nose. Lera felt that her pulse had been purified at least twice. She understood that most likely it was her father, Alexander Schwarzenberg. The girl was standing at the gate, unable to move, and he, in the meantime, noticed her and headed straight to the gate. The dog was sewing next to him. He walked with confident, energetic steps, not closing his eyes from the guest. Having stopped literally a meter from her, he froze. His face, still young and beautiful, expressed a whole range of feelings: confusion, surprise, distrust, and even fear. At this moment, Lera finally realized that her father was in front of her. She seemed to be looking in the mirror. He had the same facial features, the same straight nose, cheekbones, eye cut, even a shape of a lip. Only Alex Schwarzenberg had light hair and blue eyes, and his dark chivalry and eyes of chocolate color. Lera inherited it from her mother. "I can help you with something?" the man asked confidently, looking at her face. Praying that the voice would not tremble, Lera still asked just in case. "I would like to see Mr. von Schwarzenberg. I have to tell him something." The man opened the gate and went to meet her, and stretched her hand. The girl carefully put her fingers into his palm. "I apologize, but who are you?" He looked at her in anticipation. "I came from Russia." Lera said these words and noticed how he changed his face. "My name is Valeria Zakharova." He instantly got pale. Obviously, he remembered this surname well, which was carried by her mother, Lera, to her marriage. "Please come in." He stepped aside and let her in the gate. They were walking silently until they reached the house. The dog was running around, not paying attention to the guest. Well, obviously, this is the most aristocratic upbringing, when even dogs in the presence of strangers behave decently. At the front door of the house, they were met by the innkeeper, who was ordered by Alex to organize a tea party and invite the emerging Princess Bridget. So she also has a grandmother. Finally, they found themselves in the hall. The beauty around just blinded the eyes. Luri thought she had come to one of the German museums of the country, which she had seen a lot during her trip in the past. Old chandeliers, gable ends, vintage furniture from expensive sorts of wood, and silence, so deafening that Lera heard the knock of her own heart. "Let's go to my office," Alex invited. They walked into a richly furnished room, more reminiscent of a library, for there were bookshelves with books all over the perimeter of the room. Lera noticed that many of them, they didn't have names on the roots, so they were very old. He pointed her to the guest chair at the desk, and he sat opposite. "So, you are Olga's relative," he quietly said, like this, right in the forehead. Lera realized that there was nowhere to retreat, so she stubbornly nodded. "She's also here, also in the Trident." His voice was filled with such hope that a bitter coma stuck in the girl's throat. "Alas, she is not here. She died 2 years ago." Lera saw his face twitching and his eyes got wet. "And she was also my mother." "Well, she said that." Alexander looked at her with all his eyes, hands neatly folded on the table. They were noticeably touched. They both were silent. Lera saw tears flow down his cheeks. This man cried for his mother, for their unborn life, for their past, which is completely obvious and has remained in his memory. And she was grateful to him for that. He loved her. He was waiting for her. So they sat opposite each other, so similar, close in blood, but completely strangers. Lera didn't know how much time had passed before he asked his question. "How old are you, Valeria?" "August." These words Lera whispered, for the voice from the overflowing feelings sat to the limit. It was not difficult for him to count in his mind. Thoughts, feelings, conclusions, pain. All of this was reflected on his face. He closed his eyes with his hands, and the girl heard a depressed sob. His shoulders were shaking, as it happens with children who cannot calm down. Lera froze. She suddenly became scared. What will happen next? The knock on the door of the office brought him to his senses. He straightened out in his chair, wiping his cheeks with his palms. He said loudly, "Come in, Herr Schwarzenberg. The breakfast is already served in the dining room. Frau Birgit has also come down. She is waiting for you." "Thank you, Peter. Tell her we will be in 10 minutes." The servant bowed down to the servant and disappeared in the doorway. Alex looked at the guest. "So, Valerie, you are my daughter." Lera just looked down. She heard about the German humiliation and did not wait for warm hugs, however. Alex got up from his seat and, walking around a huge desk made of massive oak, came up to Lera. The girl came up to him, and he, taking her hands in his, pulled her to himself and locked her in a hug. She was like a little girl again, who dreamed of saying the word dad at least once. And now she wasn't alone. The girl was happy. What a pity that there are no Roma here. Then her happiness would be complete. She also hugged her father, who for many years did not know about her. Why did Mom do that? Lera will never know about this. Finally, he tore her off her chest and looked in her face. "Of course, you look like me, girl. I look in the mirror. Oh my God, this is happiness. It's just incredible. I've been looking for Olga for so many years, but I didn't know where she moved from Moscow, where we first saw each other. I loved her more than life. But she left me. And years later you appear. It's a miracle." He laughed through the tears, not letting go of his daughter's hands and palms. "I have to give you something." Lera indecisively spoke. somehow coping with the emotions. He questionably looked at her, and she pulled out her bags, letters, and ring. Seeing the ring, Alex closed his mouth with his palm, as if he was afraid that he would scream. It seemed that he was about to lose sympathy. I gave this ring to my Olga on the last day of our meeting. I then made an offer. She agreed, but then suddenly disappeared. He touched it with his hand, stroked the stone, and as if he was carrying. She kept him. Then his gaze fell on the letter, and after reading the handwriting, he began to read with delight. After all 3 letters were read, Alex looked at Lera again. Tears flowed back down his face. I lost the love of my whole life. I almost put up with it, learned to live without her. But fate made me a special gift. Now he smiled. She gave me you, my daughter, my flesh and blood, which was born by the one who stole my heart forever. I found out by chance when I was sorting out my mother's things. I thought my father had died. You must have been very lonely when she left. He looked at her with anxiety and suffering. Yes, very. To just get acquainted, talk? I don't need anything, right? He put his finger on her lips and she froze on the floor. Now we will go and you will get acquainted with your grandmother, and then we will come back here and we will talk for a long, long time. You will tell me everything about your life, about yourself, about your mother. Lera nodded. By the time they were in the canteen, the girl calmed down a little, and although everything that happened seemed to her a fairy tale, a deception of consciousness, a magical dream, she understood that her life had changed forever. Her father believed her immediately and without a word, did not drive her away, did not doubt anything. The dining room of the Prince von Schwarzenberg was held in calm shades of pastel shades. Light antique furniture in the style of late Baroque Coco especially impressed Lera, an amateur of vintage and old. A magnificent buffet of white oak, golden body encrusting, and Erker glasses. The buffet was full of dishes, which Lera had never seen before. At the head of a huge table covered with the thinnest white, with completely white hair, laid down in a slender snail on the back of the head. The oval face with thin lips and a small straight nose, on which round glasses were sitting, looked unhappy. Good morning. Sorry for making you wait, Mom. Alex politely greeted his mother. But I had more than obvious reasons. And he, putting his hand on Larry's back, Birgit indescribably drank a sip of tea. She didn't think that another tearful interview with a young journalist would be more important than a Christmas meal with her mother. He seemed to have missed her words by the ears. Let me introduce you to Valeria Zakharova. She only arrived from Moscow yesterday. With these words, the woman's face stretched out and froze. Her hand with a cup of tea silently went down to the table, from which the aromatic liquid splashed and left a stain on the snow-white rink. She thought for a few seconds about what was happening, then asked the question to her already familiar Lera. How old are you, girl? She looked so high-pitched that Lera slowly began to guess why her mother ran away from her happiness. I am years old, madam. The old lady was shudderingly breathing in the air. So, this is your daughter, she said, looking at her son. It's not hard to guess, given that you have the same face. I knew that this moment would come sooner or later. Alexander looked at Lera first, then at his mother. Did you know? She was silent, and he repeated the question. Did you know that Olga is pregnant? The old woman drank tea again. Her chin was trembling in betrayal. She looked out the window, where the December sun was pouring gold on the park road. I knew, she replied, gasping. Alexander approached the table and sat next to her. Lera carefully sat on the chair at the very end. You knew I was going to be a father, and you didn't say anything? He whispered. For a moment, Larry thought that he would hit her now. His gaze was so terrible. All these years, when I was missing Olga, suffering in the society of my unloved wife, suffering from the fact that I have no heirs, you knew that I had a child. Birgit was silent, not looking at him. Her eyes shone. What have you done? The son grabbed her by the wrist. What have you done? All I've done was for you. For the sake of the family. She fell out. What did you say, Olga? She left me because of you. Answer me. Then the old woman burst into tears. Yes, yes, I'm to blame for her leaving. I threatened her that I would never accept a plebeian into my family. That sooner or later you will understand what mistake you have made, that society will never accept either her or her child. I told her that she would not receive a penny from our state, and then offered money for her to leave, but she did not take them. Oh my God, how could you? And Sherishin looked at her. Alex, this is my blood, the blood of Schwarzenberg. He nodded at Lera. I was looking for them. Birgit was in the hospital. I was looking for them for many years. When you and Emma divorced, I hired a private detective to find both Olga and the child, if he was born. I saw your suffering and I regretted my actions. But they were not in Moscow. The thread broke in some provincial town, where she was seen for the last time. I wanted to fix everything, she cried, her eyes wet with a handkerchief, and Luri, who lost her grandmother on the maternity line as a child, felt sorry for her. Alexander sat, lowering his head on his hand. Luri felt uncomfortable, because they talked as if she wasn't here. She suddenly thought about the house, about Roma, about Vitya. She suddenly took a deep breath, which attracted the attention of both her father and grandmother. Valeria said, Alex, you can't even imagine how sorry I am. You grew up far from your family, far from me and our roots, our stories. We have so much to do. I had a mother, she said sadly, and she always loved and supported me, so I wasn't alone. He moved to her and took the hands of his daughter. Now no one will ever separate us. He looked at his mother, who was silently slurping over his cup of tea. You will live here, in your own home, which belongs to you. If you don't want to, you can choose any house you like, and we'll buy it. He looked at her with such enthusiasm and hoped that Lera didn't dare to say anything. I really want to know you better. My daughter, my child. He was in his mouth, which were found on the third floor. They talked to Alex for a long time in the living room, telling each other about their lives, and he greedily caught every word about Olga. When Lera said that she no longer had a man, he burst into tears. From time to time, Birgit joined them, but her son did not welcome her appearance very much, and she moved under some pretext. In the evening, they went for a walk around Trier, and their father showed them the famous Basilica of Constantine and the Grand Cathedral of St. Peter, where the festive services were held. On the way, they often met the choral singers, who politely smiled at all the passers-by, and the girl even penetrated the spirit of a real Catholic Christmas. Lera could not resist admiration. A huge, well-kept room with magnificent decoration, thousands of candles, organ music, sarcophagi with relics of saints. Right in the stone floor, the names of the bishops and cardinals buried here. Under the plates, polished by millions of human feet for several centuries. The cathedral was a people's hall, and they with their father, without finding a single free bench, went out into the cold December air again. Near the basilica in the cozy street cafe, Lera and Alexander visited fragrant glintwine and cheese balls made of mozzarella and crispy cornflakes. Then they headed to the embankment and wandered along the river Moselle to the pedestrian bridge to a respectable area of rich villas and mansion houses. I got the best gift for this Christmas. With a smile, said Alex, when they were at the gate of the prince's residence. It's a pity that my happiness will never be complete without your mother. You must accept this and live on. Like me? Lera shook his hand. He just sadly nodded, and they headed home. In the dining room, as in the morning, they were expected by Birgit. When they entered, she sat at the table, stretched out like a string, and angrily squeezed her lips without a word. Lera suddenly realized that she was not angry with her. She looked so guilty and unhappy that the girl, who suddenly gave in to the impulse, approached her and hugged her. Birgit suddenly jumped on the chair and gazed at her son, who was no less surprised than her, and froze halfway to the table, waiting for his mother-in-law to give her a nasty tirade about a bad behavior. The old lady gently took her granddaughter away and, wiping away her tears, said, "If you're late for Christmas dinner, you might as well get changed." Hearing these words, Prince Alexander von Schwarzenberg, he laughed easily. Christmas morning was cloudy and rainy. Lera woke up on a giant bed in her bedroom under the roof of her father's house, and first of all she dialed Roma's number. It's strange, after several long whispers, short ones were heard. Obviously, he dropped the phone. Lera so desperately missed him that she was not even pleased with the reunion with her father. She felt lost and lonely. Several times during the day, Lera called him, and the story repeated. Vitka listened to her story out of breath and promised to find out what happened to Roma. On December, a call was made to the reception, where Prince von Schwarzenberg planned to, her unexpectedly announced daughter. In this connection, all day long, the house on Biverstrasse was visited by port stylists, local newspapers reporters, and even one journalist from Berlin. Lera was deathly tired of such close attention to her person, and in the evening after dinner, they spent the evening with her father in a distant hotel, where the fireplace was burning hot. This time she shared her dreams with him, about professional self-realization, which he was delighted with, by offering to organize his own business here in Germany. He was so inspired to talk about it, listened to it so carefully, that the girl was ashamed that his plan was not destined to fail. After the new year, she will fly home, to Russia, where there is a person for whom she will refuse to, even from the perspective of living here, next to her relatives. Maybe we should tell Alex about Rome? Maybe he will even understand her, because in his life there was also great love. Without hiding anything, she told her father a long history of their relationship, strengthening the stories about his character, responsibility for the relationship with the sick sister, and that the meeting of her and Lera with her father. It was thanks to his efforts and connections. Alex heard everything with extreme interest. It means that this young man takes a very important place in your life. He smiled, turned his head to the side, and looked at his daughter with admiration. Lera nodded. And he is surely very offended by me. Why? The girl told her father about Sveta, about the money she had left before she left. Oh, women! With a slight reproach, Alexander said, "How can you be so impudent in your good deeds? Of course, he is offended at you, dear. And what can I do?" Her voice was treacherously trembling. Of course, to rush to him from all sides. "Oh, and how are you? How is the reception?" He laughed. "But let's have a meeting, and on the morning of January SD you will board the plane to Moscow. I will organize everything. Just promise to come back to me." "I promise, Dad." Lera was so grateful to him that she could not hold back and leaned against her father's chest. He gently stroked her hair and added, "I will call my good friend in Berlin. He is a professor. We will try to help your sister, your beloved one." "Thank you. Thank you very much." The girl thanked him warmly. A few minutes later, she already climbed the twisted stairs into her room, intending to call the screw. The unknown killed Lera. She hadn't heard Ronka's voice for 2 days. "Hello?" She heard a hoarse voice. "Vita? Uh-huh. Lurka, is that you?" "It's me." Lera was a little confused. "What's wrong with your voice?" It turned out that Vitka fell off with a temperature, not having time to see Roma. Vitka's phone rings. He also drops. Wishing her friend a quick recovery and turning off, Lera dialed Sveka's number. "The network's action zone," said the opposing voice in the phone. "Well, it remains only to bomb the social network." "What is happening?" "Something happened?" Lera did not find her place from ignorance. 3 days before the reception, they flew by quickly. She managed to get acquainted with numerous uncles and aunts, better know her father and grandmother and understand that her life will never be the same. On the day of the reception, Lera woke up with terrible headache. She dreamed of Romka with her arms stretched out, sick Vitya and Svetka in a knitted hat on a hospital bed. In addition to everything, the phone was still silent. All her calls remained unanswered. Having weighed her bare feet off the bed, Lera again dialed Rom's number. She couldn't take it anymore. The girl didn't have time to put her phone down when the phone rang. It was Avito. Hello. Lera answered with a hoarse voice. Lurka, something happened here. Romka got into an accident. I don't know anything myself, because I'm still lying in bed. Lera didn't listen to her. In minutes, she was standing in the living room of her new house with a suitcase in her, and explained to her father. The house was ready to be received. Additional hired servants were sending out. She had to book a ticket for a direct flight to Frankfurt, Moscow, and from Moscow to Ulyanovsk. She had to land at the Eastern Airport exactly at p.m. The personal driver of Prince von Schwarzenberg, in an hour and a half, was driving her from Riga to Frankfurt, and soon Lera was on her way to Russia. The day was running out in one breath, and while sitting in a taxi that drove her from the Lera was thinking that she might lose Roma. What's wrong with him? Are his injuries serious? She knew nothing about this. She only knew the hospital he was in. Vika sent her a text message when Lera was still in heaven. Falling asleep from tension and fatigue, Lera literally fell out of Yandex taxi near the Central City Hospital, which for some reason there was no one. From somewhere the music and the noise of the fun were heard. Unexpectedly, she got to her. Today is December Street. New Year. How could she forget about it? Finally, looking in the countless corridors of the reception room, the girl in a white dress and giving her a euro bill, Lera, being almost in a semi-hysterical state, asked to take her to Roman Muramtsev's ward, which is in the trauma department. The young nurse, with her eyes rounded, looked at the crazy girl with the suitcase demanding a date with the patient. But she took the money and took Lera to the right floor. I don't know the ward, sorry, but I can ask. The girl's neck squeaked. Lera nodded. Oh, it's almost o'clock. New Year. The girl was in a hurry and quickly retreated. Lera quickly walked into the department, throwing the sister's suitcase. It was quiet in the corridor, and Lera, gathered in spirit, was preparing to knock on all the doors. As if she had put her hand on the door of the first room, she opened and Lera saw Svetka's blushing face. Out of surprise, she shivered so much that she dropped the light. What happened? Lera heard Roma's weak voice. Lera quickly embraced the light and, without saying anything, rushed into the room. The room was single bedroom and dark. Only a small bedside table light was on. On the high bed that stood in the center of the room lay a man, the most desirable in the world. His head and torso were wrapped in bandages. The left leg was hanging on the "That I'm replacing you with a foreign prince?" He was silent because of it. Oh my God, you're such a moron, Muramtsev. You're just impassable. She brought her face closer to him. Their lips met. At that moment, Lera understood how much he was needed for her. Like air, like light. She loved him all her life, hiding and running away from her feelings. I've spent precious time with neither of them, nor with those. She will not make such a mistake again. Roma hugged her gently, but powerfully, as if he wanted to show that he would never let go of her again. My darling, I missed you so much. Looking at them, Svetka stood by the door and cried out of happiness. Where Svetka was undergoing an immunotherapy course. Her symptoms improved, and the doctor, who was told by Larry by Alex, soon told them that the disease had been remission. Returning to Trier, Larry was getting closer and closer to his new relatives, who were out of their minds because of Roma. At the end of March, they were already hugging at the airport with Vita, who had come to their engagement. It was warm and sunny. The nature woke up from a winter sleep and delighted the eyes with fresh greens of parks and squares. In the waiting room, Lera and Roma held hands when they saw a familiar figure in the crowd. Having taken a huge suitcase from her hands, Roma began to squeeze through the crowd of visitors and guests, and the girls, hugging, followed him. You know who I saw recently in a female consultation? Your ex, she whispered to Larry. He brought his secretary to the UZI, and they had a scandal right in front of the cabinet because she had confused the hidden words. Imagine, I, of course, greeted and politely reminded him that you had found your father, the German prince. You would see how the face of the future father would stretch out. Larry laughed. And now your face will stretch out. Oh, come on. Vitya closed her left eye. You will soon become an aunt and a godmother. Mother of my woman. Vitya hugged her friend in a rush, and tears were pouring out of her eyes. Lurka, wow. How happy I am for you. Ronka came up to them and hugged both of their shoulders. It's all right. Yes, Lera whispered. Now, having hit your own shoulder, everything is exactly fine.